Welcome to the Zealous Podcast. I'm your host, Rocky Snyder. This week, Josh Morrison's in the house with me. He's from the Cleveland Guardians, sports science analyst. We're going to talk all about how he sorts through the data to help his players stay in peak performance. Before we get underway, make sure if you're an NSCA member, cast your vote. There's an election going on, and I happen to be on the ballot for the board of directors, so slide a vote my way if you can. Also, if you're going to be in June in the Central Coast of California, you want to come there, I've got a continuing education workshop all about using foot wedges from rehab to return to performance. It's good for athletic trainers, NSCA, and physical therapists. You get yourself some CEU credits for that. Also, Setanta College is a place to go for a Master's of Science in Applied Sports Biomechanics, Applied Sport and Exercise Psychology. You've got a Master's of Science in Performance Coaching, or you can choose Sports Injury and Return to Performance Management. Go to setantacollege.com, enter RS10 for 10% off tuition. Here we go. Well, Josh, thanks for coming on, Zealous. I can't thank you enough for putting a little time aside, because I know that you're at least a third of the way through the season, approaching the halfway mark in the next month or so. So it's great to have you on, first of all. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I had a chance to listen to some of your old podcasts and hear some people I look up to, some people I know. So, yeah, really excited for this.
Well, right on. I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, because we get some really great individuals, and selfishly speaking, I learned so much with every episode, so I can't wait to learn all about sports science here. But before we get underway with the ins and outs of sports science and what you do with the Guardians, I'd love to know, how the heck did you get there? I mean, I've seen you were with the Latin America Oakland A's organization. You've been down to Australia for a couple of years with rugby, and you're from Nevada, and here you sit in Columbus, Ohio. So take me on a little journey of, like, how did you even get started on this career path?
Yeah, so like you said, I grew up in rural northern Nevada. Grew up playing sports like most people do that are in our field. And then I went to school at University of Tampa, which now is actually a baseball powerhouse. I mean, they were back then too, but I had nothing to do with anything baseball in Tampa, unfortunately, I guess. But yeah, so I did a semester in Spain. I finished Tampa with a degree in Spanish and a degree in exercise physiology. Got a lot of good experience in a lab there. But I knew, like, I didn't like the lab setting. And so I ended up graduating a little bit early, and I went to England to interview for some master's positions. And all of them ended up kind of being the same, right? They were really lab heavy. One of the programs I was looking at was at the University of Brighton, and it was environmental extremes. And so again, like, really lab based, like you're testing athletes, heat, cold, altitude. And it was interesting, right? But I wanted that, like, hands-on, where I'm working on a player's program. I'm with them day to day, and you get that team environment. And I like being in the weight room. I like being on the field, and the lab just wasn't quite for me. So luckily, a professor there actually suggested I look at a program down in Australia. They're like, hey, Bond University starting this program. It's a mixture of strength and conditioning, biomechanics, sports science. And that was probably the first time I'd really heard the word sports science. So I was like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. I ended up getting in contact with Bond University. And then I think probably 2.5 months later, I moved to Australia. So it was really, really quick process. And like you said, I was down there for a couple of years. I had the opportunity to take, like, an internship and a placement and do research with a rugby team. And then that led to working with the U20 Junior Wallabies. And
so did that put you in the lab setting, or were you able to do your research on the pitch?
Yeah, so my research was actually with GPS units. And so this was back in 2016, 17. They'd been in Australia at that time, probably, I don't know, 15, 20 years. Like, they'd been established there, even though in the US they're still kind of rolling in. So yeah, it was great. I was with the team. I was kind of, for them in Australia, their strength and conditioning and their sports science aren't as separate as ours. They're much more integrated, right? Like, you're working in a lab a little bit. You're working as a strength coach. You're the sports scientist. There might be people who favor one or the other, but they're very intertwined with each other.
Really? Okay.
So yeah, that's probably one of the main differences I saw. It's like they still have the high performance team, right? We have dietitians, we have physios, athletic trainers, the coaches, the people actually coaching fundamental sports. But then strength and conditioning and sports science are much more of a gray area of who takes what and does what.
How did that work out? I find that fascinating. In fact, I find it more almost appealing rather than having specialists that now you have to have some kind of bridging and communication, where if you're doing both, you actually, you got your foot on both sides of the fence, so to speak. So how did that work? Like, in your capacity, what were you responsible for?
It works really smoothly, I think. The benefit as well in Australia is everyone's highly educated who works in sports. Like a lot of the head coaches of the rugby team we're with and the junior wallabies, like they have bachelor's degrees in kinesiology or movement science. Like they're educated into what we're doing, so that helps. But like you said, yeah, you're not necessarily a specialist. You're more of a jack of all trades. So people tend to lean towards what they like and what they're good at, right? Like if you have an understanding of biomechanics, sports science, physiology, strength and conditioning, like you're gonna kind of edge towards what you like, and that's what you're good at. But yeah, it works really well because everybody kind of has an idea of what everyone else is working on and what they're talking about and what they're bringing to the table without having to like dissect it so much so that you have to start from square one every time you meet someone new or comes into their like high performance domain.
Got it. Okay. So take me forward after Australia. What was going on?
Yeah, so Australia ended. I got kicked out of the country. My visa expired. I was done. I was kind of on the bridge between, do I want to pursue a PhD, which quite a few of my classmates did. They continued working with the placement they were at, or they found a new team. And again, like the PhD over there was tantalizing because they were able to work while they do research, and you're doing research on the team you're working for. So it's like you're kind of helping yourself out, you're helping the team out, but you're also pursuing your education at the same time. So it was appealing, but I ended up coming back to the States. I got all the certifications that I had the equivalent of in Australia. So I got my CSCS, I did USAW, I did some nutrition things, and started applying for jobs. And I liked rugby. I loved it. It was great to work in rugby, and very different now than working in baseball. But I applied for everything. I like volleyball, I like tennis, I like soccer, track and field. I ran growing up. So anything I could apply to, I started. And baseball jobs just immediately started coming because I speak Spanish. And so that, yeah, within a couple of weeks of applying to jobs, I think I had 3 or 4 interviews with MLB teams. And I took a job down in the Dominican Republic with the Oakland A's. And I worked under JD Howell, who you had on the podcast a couple weeks ago.
Right on. Yeah, JD is a good guy. Oh,
yeah.
So you were down there, 18, 19? Is that what it was? Somewhere around there?
Yeah, so he was a Latin American coordinator, and I was down there with the team.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. And I think it sounds like your background of not being a specialist necessarily, but generalist in terms of even the sports that you competed in kind of helped you to have a broader perspective of where you could utilize your talents and who could benefit from them. That's really cool. Okay, so then from Oakland, you managed your way up to Cleveland. Is that how that went, or from the DR?
Yeah, so Oakland wasn't a great fit for me. Like I said, JD's great. I really appreciate him as a boss. It helped me grow, and being down in the Dominican Republic was a great opportunity. I got a lot out of it. It helped my coaching. It helped me be resourceful, but it just wasn't a good fit for me and what I wanted to keep growing as. So the last week I was in the Dominican Republic, actually, I met some of our Major League Strength and Conditioning staff now at a conference, and yeah, we kind of hit it off. We started talking. They're like, "Oh, you have experience with GPS units. We just hired Dr. Freeston at the time. They just hired him, so like we have an Australian on board. Like you would just go in Australia. You speak Spanish, and it was kind of like this. Oh, like we might have a position for you. We're not sure." So I didn't hear from them for, I don't know, maybe a couple weeks. And then I ended up applying for, I think it was high A strength coach. And I went in and I did the whole interview. It was this, we're very thorough with our interviews at the Guardians. I think I interviewed with 17 different people over the course of a day. I gave a
Are you kidding me?
Yeah, it's like, it's just all day. Like, they want you to touch everyone. It's great. Like, if everybody has a touch point, that everybody gets a say. And yeah, it's a great way, not only just to like weed out people that maybe don't mesh well with others, but it's just like a great way to see how people work in an environment that's stressful, right? So I was
Dude,
there.
how freaking exhausted were you after having to interview with 17 people?
Some of them were in groups. So I would say, like, I had breakfast with a group of guys. I had breakfast with, like, I had lunch with a couple people. But yeah, it was just like nonstop, probably from 8 in the morning till, I don't know, 4 or 5. And I gave a presentation as well. I gave a 30-minute presentation on any topic I wanted. And the audience was like, anybody could show up. So it could be strength and conditioning staff. It could be front office staff. It was very ambiguous onto who I'd be presenting to.
Did they throw that to you right when you got there, or did you have time to? Did they give you a heads up? Hey, when you get here, we're going to ask you for a 30-minute presentation.
Oh no, they gave me some time to prepare. Yeah, they gave me, I think, a week or so.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
What did you prepare on? I'm just curious.
I presented on PAT. So I presented on more probably strength and conditioning based. But we've done a lot of like PAT in Australia and like primers and stuff like that, and potentiation. So I thought it went well. I mean, it went well enough I could get a job out of it. So yeah, so I had the presentation, I had the interview, and then they're like, hey, this position isn't good for you. We're going to go with the other candidate. So they actually ended up hiring the other candidate. There was 2 of us that were there that day, or like that interviewed that week. And so I was like, all right, that's fine. And they said, but we think we might be able to create a position for you. Like, would you be willing to go down to the Dominican Republic? You can have your hand in strength and conditioning. You can have a little bit of hand in rehab, and then you can run the GPS units, catapult. You can run our load monitoring, and you can kind of like, not just like open range, but like, hey, like, this space is new and we want someone to explore it.
Nice.
Yeah. So
you said, yeah.
Yeah, I said, yeah. I said, I've been in the DR. At that point, I'd been living in the DR for a year pretty much. And I've been out of the country for almost 4 years. Like, I wasn't like stationary anywhere. I was like, yeah, let's do it. So yeah, I took the job, and I think I started like a week later. I think I went to Cleveland and did onboarding, and then went off to spring training, and then went to the Dominican.
Fantastic. And now within the AAA minor, all the teams, you're basically in the developing athlete population, not necessarily, which I think is actually more intriguing than if you were primetime MLB sports scientist, because I think there's greater degrees of disparity, greater degrees of growth, change. I mean, yeah, if you're crunching numbers or you're seeing development, you're going to see a wider spectrum with where you are compared to when you get to the creme de la creme. Would you agree?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. My roles morphed over the years. It's become much more structured. First of all, like, we have less of like, hey, explore anything you want to. It's sports science. Like, we have targeted initiatives. Like I said, Dr. Jonathan Friesen, my boss, is like very good at giving us projects to work on, and we have things that we're exploring as a team, individually. And so, yeah, like you said, it's really intriguing to look at the vast difference in players. Like, right now, I'm working with AAA players who are, I don't know, some of them are in their mid-30s, all the way down to 15-year-olds that we're hoping to be our players come January when they sign their professional contract. So it's like very different, right? Some of them come from a heavy background from college, where they had a lot of exposure to the weight room. They had a lot of exposure to testing, maybe on force plates, or they had GPS, to players that we're hoping to sign that would be equivalent to like a freshman in high school that's never seen a weight room.
Got it.
Yeah, very, very vast and very different profiles we're looking at. So it is exciting to see how can we take this player and make them a better version of themselves physically so that they're able to work with our fundamental staff, our pitching, our hitting, our defensive coaches to be the best baseball players. And then ultimately, like, what can I do to help the minor leagues to better support our major league to, of course, win a World Series, which is what we all want.
Okay, answer that question then. How do you do that?
Yeah, so our department, we focus on 5 things. We focus on testing players. Like, we want to get regular, reliable, accurate, precise measurements on our players to see if the programs we're giving them are actually working, right? Like, we don't want them to be wasting their time. We don't want to be wasting our strength coach's time. Everything is highly individualized in our program. So we're making sure, like, what we're doing is actually working. Are they getting stronger? Are they getting a better body composition? Are they getting more powerful the way we want them to, and the way we think that is best for them as a player? The next thing we do is education. I work with staff and players to educate them on why we're doing these tests, why it's important to adhere to our protocol, why it's important to give maximal intent when we ask them to, and like how to interpret the numbers we're getting, right? Like, how to help someone who's never seen a visualization to understand what it means and how we're using it and what decisions we're making off of it. The next part runs right into that is visualizations. I don't work as much on making the visualizations, but having input, like another guy on our team does most of the building, but having input on like what would be the most visually pleasing, what's the most digestible, and how it's going to be understood by both players and coaches. And then monitoring, we still use catapult units all through spring training. We use catapult units down in the Dominican Republic, and then we use various forms in our affiliates, so depending on what's available to us, to measure our guys doing enough work to where we're maximizing them getting better, but not too much to where we're putting them at a risk for injury maybe, and just figuring out which guys have to do what every single day, so that we're in that kind of like happy zone of maximizing their performance. And then the last thing is analysis, like working on projects and running analysis on things I think are interesting or things that our organization thinks are interesting that can help us understand why we're training, how we're training, and what we're doing well, what we maybe need to pick up the slack on.
Got it. Okay, so then you've spent time down in Australia, as you mentioned, with the emerging sports science that had been already firmly planted in the culture there, and you come back here along with a professor from Australia, and now you're in this organization. Do you find that you've taken a lot of your experience from there, especially in the what you described earlier, in more of a general sense, where you've got your foot in the weight room, your foot on the playing field, and not so much time in the laboratory? Do you find that the Guardians organization, you and this other man, have kind of brought some of that in, or where are you? Like, what is it like to be with the Guardians organization and how they approach sports science?
Yeah, I feel really, really lucky. When I started out, it maybe wasn't as organized as I'd like, but now, like I said, under Jono and with the support of the org, like you said, like, we're highly invested in this. We spend a lot of time and resources pursuing sports science and tech and even just physical development across all levels. Like, it's really important to know, like, the Guardians, they have put so much time and resources and thought into what we're doing, why we're doing it, and supporting like decisions that our team makes and decisions that the performance staff and the physical staff make. Like, I can't speak highly enough of them. They're really great. And if you have the chance to ever go down to the Dominican Republic, like, definitely come by our academy. Pretty much everything we have in Cleveland at our major league stadium, we have in the Dominican Republic. We try and mimic it. We have everything available, all the resources, so that when players move from the DR to Arizona to low A, high A, all the way up the ladder, we're able to get that information and keep that continuity.
Wow, that's pretty unique. I mean, especially speaking to some some other friends and colleagues in the past on previous episodes talking about the DR is that, like, I know the A's just built a brand new facility and they're pretty stoked about that, but most of them are saying, well, we don't have the same resources as we do back in the States. In fact, we've got to send players up there when we've got certain kind of issues, and then they come back down. But that doesn't seem to be the same scenario for you. You're self-contained down there. That's pretty impressive.
And that was part of the reason I was so willing to take the job from the A's to the Guardians, was because, yeah, for me, it was a better environment. Like, I had access to a lot of resources. I have now, when I go down there, I have players that are really, really bought into what we're doing. And then it makes it easier, right? Like, if I see a player when I'm in the DR and then I see them again in AA, like, I know that I'm not going to have to teach them stuff. I'm not going to have to, like, introduce them to technology or testing or protocols or, like, why we're doing it. It's just kind of like a transition of a player's been with us 6-7 years. Like, they know why we're recording stuff. They're interested in what we're recording, and hopefully they're bought into the process.
And would you say that that's the majority of players these days, that most of them are bought in?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, definitely of players that are homegrown by us. Like, yeah, occasionally they might decline something because they're not feeling well, but they're at least willing to have a conversation. They're willing to work with us to figure out, all right, if we don't want to do that because it bothers you or you're not all the way open to it, what else can we do to get information so that we're not just leaving you out in the dust?
Got it. Okay, so sports science, delving a little bit deeper. What are you've already mentioned a few things, but what are your big buckets in regards to peak performance, to guiding your players toward it? What elements of sports science do you think have a hierarchy as the top?
I think, for one, I think the most important thing would be program efficacy and player intent. So that being said, like, is the program that we're helping shape, our strength and conditioning coaches are making programs, our athletic trainers and our physios are making programs, we're giving them information to say this is working, this isn't working. Yeah, like that is really important information to give. But, like, if a player's not actually executing that program, or if they're not executing that program with maximal intent, like, we're saying squat heavy and they're not squatting heavy. We're saying squat fast, they're not squatting fast. Like, we're saying do this movement in this way and it's not happening, or it's not happening consistently, then I think that's, like, the number two things that I would say are they doing it with intent? Are they following the program we're giving them? And then doing that checks and balances with the program and seeing, like, is this program right for them and their goals?
That was not what I was expecting, but that makes complete sense at the same time. I thought you were going to give me certain elements within the field of science, but okay, let's talk about program efficacy. So how do you determine that? I mean, how do you pick apart, if we're looking at this block or these lifts or whatever elements of the program, and how do you discern if it's efficacy based on a player's ability or outcome? How do you connect the dots? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, I think it comes back to just, like, being consistent, like consistency from us, asking from them, like, hey, we're doing this program, we're gonna test you, we need you to be bought in. Consistency from them being with us for years and years and years, and knowing, like, hey, this is, like, our philosophy, like, we're asking you to do these things, we're gonna measure you. A lot of our performance testing we do monthly, so we're asking you every month to do a little checks and balance of, are you stronger, are you faster, is your body comp improving? And then if it's not, or if it's not changing in the way that we want it to, then it's kind of like, all right, like, let's start this cycle over and adjust your program, check in with you, are you following it, do you like it, have you not been able to do it because you've been on the road, have you been sick, like, okay, like, it wasn't happening because of this reason, let's start over, run this program, and then in a month we'll check back in and see if we're making any sort of improvement, or in 3 months, or in a year. Like, like, physiologically some things don't happen that quick, but we can see trends, and we can see in the off season, do they come in stronger, like, what are they doing? In the season, we're just trying to, like, hold on to lean muscle mass and try and keep them strong so that hopefully can be at less risk for injury. But yeah, I think it comes down to communication and just knowing everybody has an eye on them, right? Like, I don't know if you've been in an affiliate much, but like those, I think we have 9-10 staff members are traveling with the players. Like they're with each other 24/7 almost. Like they know what's up. They know who's working, who's putting in the effort, and who's communicating how they feel.
Yeah, I'm imagining and plotting out a graph and seeing that preseason we're going to see an increase in performance and fairly steadily into the beginning of the season. But somewhere probably around now, about a third of the way through the season, they are going to, I don't know where those balloons come from, brother. I haven't figured out Zoom entirely. So for the listening audience, I had just some icons flying across my screen right now. And I swear, if I got some people in the background behind the curtain pushing my buttons, I'm going to find them. But anyway, I can see that line curve going. And then there's going to be a plateauing and maybe even potentially a dip because we're dealing with a lot of travel time. We're dealing with biorhythms. We're dealing with a lot of just a lot of stimuli, mental, physical, and so on. So I wouldn't be surprised if there is a little dip in performance somewhere right about now, and then there's a little bit of adjustment, shall we say, and then there's maybe a little bit more improvement, and then we have a plateau near the end of the season, and then of course the hope is that performance stays the same, if not improves through the postseason. But am I kind of like, is that the profile that you see, or is it completely different than what I'm imagining?
Yeah, it's definitely a profile that we see. It depends on which metric we're looking at, right? Like, are we looking at strength? It might not drop off as much. Like when fatigue starts to come in, their power might drop off. And it depends. Like we go through these cycles and these blocks of like, all right, the lowest hanging fruit might be body composition at the time. And we think that would impact their performance the most if we can improve body composition. So that might be something we target a little bit more in season. And then maybe like we really want to get them strong and we know that they're not playing as much in the off season. So we want to, like you said, it might dip down in the beginning of the season. So in that off season, we want to get their strength as high as it can go. So if it does drop down, maybe it's not as impactful if they were weak, right? You know, weak, slow,
Mm-hmm.
having their strength and power drop off might not be, that would be much worse than having a fast, strong guy have a little bit of decrease of power. But yeah, I think you're right. Like we definitely see fatigue start to come in mid-season. And that's where the load monitoring comes in, right? Like we're looking at how much guys are playing a different amount of games, but guys are running a different amount during the games, depending on how well they're batting or what position they play in defense. And we're trying to, like preserve as much of that during the season as possible because it is a long season, right? Like it goes from, they start playing in February and sometimes it goes to October. So.
Yeah. Okay. I actually have one of my favorite like sports movie is Moneyball, just because of the outlier, the a different perspective of something that is very traditional, right? So we've got from that point on, now Hollywood exaggerated, of course, but basically they looked at on-base percentage as one of the key indicators of how to build a team. And from that point, the A's at that time went on a run of like 22 wins in a row, and then of course that brought on the 2004 breaking the curse Boston Red Sox after 86 years. And it changed the game in many ways, the way in which people look at it. So long-winded explanation to lead up to this question is in regards to the elements that you see, the statistics and the data that you're mining from all of this wearable tech and other data sources. Are you noticing something? And not to give away any kind of team secrets or anything, but are you seeing something that might be considered innocuous or somewhat inconsequential actually has a greater bearing and provides you with a deeper amount of insight in terms of getting more out of your players?
It's tough. I don't think there's like some hidden secret of something we haven't found out. I do think of what we're working with, there's probably a different combination or a different hierarchy of priority, maybe like, but I don't think it's like overly complicated. I think it's have good communication, like we have experts in every area, right? We have dietitians, like use them. We have physios that look at movement quality, like use them. When you're making a decision, don't make it on your own. Like ask people that you work with and that you're interacting with, like for their insight. Like they might be seeing something you're not. So I don't know if it's, and that's different for every player, right? Like every case study that we come up with within our high performance team, like someone else is going to have the lead because they see something maybe that someone else didn't take note of, or yeah, they had a conversation with the player, right? Like we do subjective wellness responses every day, and those are great, but like those aren't to make decisions, those are to have conversations. Like, we're getting information about how a player feels and if they're in a good mood and if they have soreness or if they slept well, if they thought they ate well. Like that information is really valuable, and I like to piece it together with the objective testing we do. But again, like it's not, I'm not going to make a decision off somebody sleeping poorly or being in a bad mood or having soreness. That's just going to lead to a conversation, and that might lead to a decision. But like you don't want to miss that conversation piece, and you don't know who else is going to be in that conversation. Like if it's nutrition and that player flags for having a marked as a bad diet, then like I'm going to loop in the dietitian. If it's soreness, like maybe we're going to talk to the athletic trainer. But yeah, I think the secret piece is better communication and yeah, and making decisions together.
Got it. Okay. I've just been delving into artificial intelligence just to help me out with a few things here and there. And I am intrigued by it. I'm amazed by it. I'm just honestly blown away by the extent with which we can begin using artificial intelligence, and albeit for the good is what I'm talking about. I don't want to think about, Terminator Day or whatever, anything like that. But are you guys using, has AI infiltrated sports science? So, because I'm envisioning you taking all of these experts and all of their insights, all of the data, and throwing it into, I don't know if Chat GP is the really Chat GPT is the really one that I'm thinking, but is there an AI software that you can put this in there, and then AI goes through it all and says, okay, here are the things you need for this player, here are the things you need for that player, not to take away from what you guys are doing, your brilliance, your experience and expertise, but to have more of a truly objective kind of outsource?
Short answer, no. I don't think we're using that sort of artificial AI intelligence stuff. Other than like me punching in my SQL code and helping it improve something I'm pulling from a database or something like that, or organize something I've written in the bullet points. But no, we're not using AI to that extent. But our R&D department is phenomenal, and we've added quite a few members to it, and so they're building models for us and for our data. So like you mentioned, that Moneyball kind of scenario, like for us in the last maybe 2 or so years, that has moved into them creating models and projects and visualizations for us to crunch our data in different ways. And so it's not AI, but it's like, I mean, to me, they're smart enough to be AI because they're doing things that I couldn't even imagine. But yeah, like it's definitely evolving in the sense of we're not just like, oh, the player has 10 pounds of muscle, let's get him to, or like 10% body fat, let's get him to 8. Like we're not that crude. We're using more complex models, some of which are extremely difficult to understand, but once they click in your mind, like that's our job to make it digestible for the coaches and the players to understand, again, like how we're coming to the conclusion of they need to increase their lower body power, how we came to the conclusion that this is what we think your body composition could look like to maximize your performance. So no AI, but like really smart people doing models.
Yeah, I can see it blending together somewhere in the next few years anyway, but there's a lot of potential out there. Okay, tell me about strengths and weaknesses, if you don't mind being a little vulnerable here and honesty here. But what's in your wheelhouse when it comes to this organization, and what are the things that you just say, okay, that's not me, I got to hand those off?
Yeah, I mean, my one strength is probably what got me into baseball is speaking Spanish. I think that's huge for us because we have Well, like personally, I'm responsible for somewhere between like 150 and 200 of our players. I think we have upwards of like 350 players sometimes with guys who might sign with us, our 40-man AAA all the way down. So close to half of them, I think, are Spanish speaking. So for us, like we've leaned really heavily into developing our Latin American players. I mean, it's testament to how much tech and how much support we have down in the Dominican. Like we keep that all the way through. But yeah, like speaking Spanish for me has really gotten me far. Being able to communicate, like it's great. All these like high level coaching techniques and all these like high level ideas that you can communicate to a college educated English speaking American born player are cool. But like if you can't translate that into Spanish and you can just like say, hey, like, how's your family? Then it's not very applicable if you can't translate it to every player. So yeah, I think for me, Spanish is definitely one of my strong points. My weak point is definitely the coding aspect. Like I'm trying to get better at it, but like learning R, learning how to create queries to help visualizations is on my next path, my goal to get better as a sports scientist, to get better as a practitioner, and just like round out my skills.
Wow, I am not anticipating your responses very well in this hour here because that was not what I was expecting either. So I'm just curious, how did you get? I imagine you're probably very fluent in Spanish, but how did that come about?
Yeah, like shout out to my high school Spanish teacher who was also my soccer coach, Nate Waite. He like really pushed us in high school. I feel like I was fairly fluent leaving high school and was able to communicate enough. And then yeah, I just pursued it in college. I started taking. I was lucky enough to go into college with quite a few credits already. So instead of taking random electives, I decided, hey, why not just take Spanish classes? I mentioned that I did study abroad in Spain. So then I came back and I was like, wow, I have close to enough credits to get a completely separate Bachelor of Arts in Spanish. So why not? So that's like definitely helped me. Taking my Spanish from Spain and college educated down to the Dominican Republic with teenagers was very different. And being down there for a couple of years and still going down there a couple of times, probably, I don't know, 5 to 10 times a year, makes me more fluent conversationally for sure. But yeah, it was just kind of like a long, slow process. Like it wasn't just overnight. It probably took 10 years before I was like, wow, I can do everything in Spanish and be confident in it.
So the younger players in the DR were giving you crap about your Castilian accent or something like that?
Yeah, a little bit. They're like, oh, hey, Dio. Like, hey.
Right on. Okay, 150 to 200 athletes. Dude, how many touch points? How often do you connect with these players? That's a lot of players.
Yeah, it's hard, and it like you rely heavily on years of confidence build up, right? Like the population out of those 150 that I struggle with the most are players in AAA that got traded or were free agents that we signed that like I don't have that relationship with them over years. And like I haven't seen them at spring training for the last 5 years. I haven't like seen them monthly during the season. Like that's the hardest. But I think it's just like being able to walk into the DR or walk into spring training, walk into Akron. I was in our AA team yesterday and just be like, hey, like how you doing? Like know that the players know who I am. They know why I'm there. We've had conversations about stuff outside of baseball. And yeah, so I think that helps, but it gets tricky. It gets really tricky, and I lean a lot on our strength coaches because they're on the floor day to day with the players, and they have that face-to-face contact that sometimes I just can't get because between 3 locations during the season is pretty tricky.
I imagine. And it sounds like you're driving from one place to the other because you're not far enough away where you can just jump on a plane, and you're just close enough where you've got yourself a road trip. What do you do? I'm curious, being a power mover like you are, mover and shaker. What do you do when you're driving from one place to the other? Are these books on tape? Are you learning another foreign language? I mean, or are you just listening to heavy metal and rocking out and just kind of zoning out?
Yeah, I'm pretty tapped out on the foreign language. I think two speaking languages and hopefully one coding language soon to come is enough for me. Yeah, I call people a lot. I'll call friends and family because I don't see them as much as I'd like. So um, I'll schedule some calls and catch up with buddies and friends. And then I'm getting more into podcasts, but I have to like rotate it in. Last year I had a couple 7-hour road trips to our low A affiliate. So
Mm.
yeah, I like honestly just jam out to country music and work on my singing voice.
Right on. All right. Good, good. I'm glad you're honest. That's good. Who's your favorite country singer? Just out of curiosity.
Old school, probably Chris Cagle. New school, maybe Cody Johnson.
Wow, Chris Cagle. That's not that old school. Okay, you just aged me well. That's
He's
perfect.
pretty old. Come
Okay,
on.
no worries. No worries. And then aside from the coding, which is probably going to be a bear in itself to really get a handle on, other areas of fascination and that pique your interest, whether it's inside sports science or out.
Yeah, I mean, I think on my docket right now is really just coding. Like my passion is with testing. So anytime we develop a new testing protocol or we get a new piece of tech that we want to start testing guys on, like I love going through like how can players cheat this? Like how would I cheat this if I wanted to compensate? How do I get guys hyped up to do this test? Like what am I going to do or tell them or like cues I'm going to give them to make sure that this test is again valid, reliable, accurate, and has really good intent. So that, I don't know if it's like a new one. It's probably like what I focus on a lot, but I like hyping the guys up. It's fun, right? It's like a little mean compared to strength coaches having to do it every day for the whole season. But like I rock up, I'm like, hey guys, we're testing. Like let's get fired up. Like let's do this. This is the number you want to beat. This is what you did last time. This is why we want you at this number. Like that's the stuff that gets me really excited.
That's cool. Okay, so you're doing full disclosure as to here's where you are, here's where we want you to be, this is where you were. It's not like a blind test. It's like, hey, just come on in here. That's interesting.
Yeah, like we like almost all of our information. We have dashboards set up that are player facing, and we have dashboards that are set up to be like coach facing or staff facing. And so yeah, a lot of times like anytime a player wants to see their data, we're not going to be shady about it. Like we're going to be fully transparent onto again like what we're collecting, why we're looking at it, and then like what is our decision making process off of that information. So yeah, like it's like hey, like you're focusing on your hip strength because that hip test wasn't very good. How's the program going? Are you adhering to it? Are you doing it? Talk with a strength coach. All right, yeah, he's doing it. Let's test you, and this is the goal we want. Like, all right, you didn't hit it. Let's keep working. Or like, yeah, you hit that. Like, let's maybe move on to something that we can attack and conquer in the meantime.
So there is a ceiling in performance, and it varies from individual to individual, of course. But what if you reach the ceiling? And how do you deal with those athletes? Perhaps you don't have athletes like that and they're always developing and improving. But what about the seasoned veterans that are in their 30s or something and they have gotten to that point potentially where there isn't going to be improvement on the monthly administrations of tests? Well, how do you handle that? How do you get them stoked and all that?
It's hard, right? Like I said, my relationships at AAA with those players are some of the most tedious. But yeah, like they're much usually they're much more educated about what we're doing. Like all right, like why are we doing this? What are we doing this for? Like they're much more bold to ask questions versus the 15-year-old that just like wants to jump as high as he can because he's like we asked him to, right? But yeah, they're those conversations are tricky, and it's hard to say like we're doing this because hopefully it'll make you physically better so that you can translate that to your sport. And so that's when, like I mentioned before, our R&D department, that's when that stuff comes back in where we can give them evidence-based. We have internal research that's been done to say like, hey, like we've seen that guys who improve this physical characteristic, like most of the time it leads to better, whatever, performance X. And so like being able to give them that, And then like, again, like building those relationships to be like, hey, like, I'd like to think that I'm an expert here. Like we're talking, like, trust me on this. Like we're not doing this just for fun. Like I'm doing this because I want you to get to the big leagues. I want you to get a long career. I want you to be healthy. So again, yeah, like it's tricky though, and everybody's different, but yeah, some guys are pretty much like, yeah, I don't want to do that. Sorry. Say, all right, like let's move on to something else. Like let's focus on something you do want to improve and that we can attack. And if they don't want to do any testing, like that's fine. Hopefully we can work with them and see how we can support them. And maybe it's just like making sure they're sleeping well or making sure they're getting proper nutrition and fuel. So I think there's always something to attack. But yeah, it definitely depends on how open they are to working with you.
Right on. Okay, coming near the end of our conversation here, I want to know your influencers. Who are the people you look toward? What are the I mean, book questions kind of easy, but are there any things that you would recommend that emerging sports scientists look into or pursue?
Yeah, I think these conversations are great. Like I wasn't the most, I don't know, like in tune with podcasts before a couple of years ago, but those long trips help. The thing that I find the most exciting and interesting to look at are like infographics. I know like YLM Sports and Science for Sports, they like take these meta-analysis and they break it down into very digestible infographics with like main takeaways, and that's like part of our job, right? Like we're taking all this information, years of learning, and we're trying to break it down to like a 2 sentence message to a player to be like, hey, like the reason you should do this is because like XYZ. And so I think that's like a really tough skill, and it doesn't always come out right. And I've definitely butchered some of those conversations where like I'm excited about something and I'm trying to get over to the player, and I like just they leave more confused than they actually came in. But yeah, like I don't know, I like those infographics where it's like they take it in a meta-analysis and they broke it down into a couple easy to digest pieces of information. But like
Nice.
YLM,
Okay.
Science for Sport, like honestly, just like scrolling on LinkedIn and looking at what takeaways people have gotten from long research.
Right on. And long-term athletic development, anywhere in regards to that, what kind of groups do you belong to on LinkedIn?
Oof, I'd have to look. I have no idea
Okay.
on the top of my head, but
All right. Well, how about
I
this?
get
If people want to follow you and your pursuits, do you have a handle on Instagram or can they connect with you on LinkedIn?
yeah, definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. Shoot a message. I love jumping on calls with. I really like enjoyed jumping on calls with college influenced people, like people who are in the college setting, just because it's I've never had that insight. So being able to share information with them. Yeah, add me on LinkedIn, Josh Morrison, and then feel free to follow me on Instagram. It's the opposite. It's Mosh Jorison, like first letters are switched on it. I don't post a
That's
whole lot of
Spanish.
yeah, I don't post a whole lot of professional stuff on there. Like it's mostly just I travel a lot, and it's mostly me traveling around and working to live versus living to work. So
Right on. Okay. And then last question, I guess, is within the places in which you travel, in your job, in the confines of what you do, is there a place that you always look forward to?
currently,
Yeah.
yeah, I love going down to the Dominican Republic. Yeah, I feel really comfortable down there. I have quite a few friends that I met outside of work there, and yeah, I love hitting the beach and yeah, just meeting people, going out to eat. I love going to Piantini and finding a new restaurant that's popped up that I can explore, and occasionally going to my coworkers' houses for barbecues. And yeah, I love the Dominican Republic. I can't get enough of it, and I love when I'm able to take my friends and family down there and show them around.
Right on. Well, I wish you a safe trip the next time you go back there. And I can't thank you enough. This has been a really insightful conversation, and appreciate your time and your expertise.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Well, that's a wrap for this episode of the Zealous Podcast. Thank you, Josh, for coming on, as well as the Cleveland Guardians for allowing this to happen. And next week, be sure to tune in because we also have an epic guest coming up. I won't tell you what it's about. Just tune in next Monday, like always. In the meantime, remember, cast your ballot for the NSCA election process. Board of Directors, also some other aspects on the ballot you don't want to miss out. And make sure you go to rockysnyder.com, sign up for the CEU workshop. If you're a physical therapist, athletic trainer, strength coach, doesn't matter, you get credits for it. Also, you get to understand closed chain biomechanics and how foot wedges can help all areas of the body for performance. Check out Setanta College, setantacollege.com, 10% off tuition if you put down RS10 in the code, and we will see you next week.